Hello and welcome to C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host, a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business strategist. I've spent years juggling family life and business, all while helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize cash flow, and build real financial success. On our show, we bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators about what really moves the needle in their business. No fluff, no filler, just real conversations and strategy and systems that you can put to use in your business right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today, we have Madison Feehan on the show. Madison, welcome.
Thank you, Heather. So happy to be here today.
So glad to have you. I'm super excited about our conversation today. I know you and I had chatted a little bit before, but I would love if you could tell our listeners just a little bit about you and how you got started as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. Favorite story of the day. So I got started as an entrepreneur 3 years ago with Space Copy, but my career started about 8 years ago when I first started diving into aerospace and STEM and all of the different science technology that goes into making life operate outside of Earth's bounds. So my traditional education background is in international business and commerce. I completed an associate's program at Harvard Business School, and then now I'm just wrapping up a degree program up in Canada. Aside from this, though, my background in aerospace has been entirely workforce developed. So I didn't have that kind of formal engineering education. I got the opportunity to go and work for NASA about 6 years ago, and I was the everything person. I got thrown into planetary science and astrophysics and heliophysics, and I got to learn all the different fractional pieces about how these different subsections of research culminate together for a larger space ecosystem. So I got all of that knowledge. I got my business knowledge. I always learn more every single day. Then decided to start Space Copy to try and change the way that we look at manufacturing in extreme environments. And I do that full time, but I also do a lot of volunteering and mentorship for young students, anywhere as young as 6 years old, all the way up to university level, to learn more about science in general and how they can have a career in STEM.
I love that. And I love that you're working with other folks. That is something that I am a huge fan of. I truly believe anybody, whether you're an entrepreneur or you have, a job working for somebody else, having a mentor and a champion is something that will be huge for your career. I truly believe one hand up and one hand down is the way it works in life. It's a small world for sure.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. So I love talking a little bit about the fact that you were at NASA before. So, I think that is something that's super intriguing. What did you learn at NASA that you've kind of carried forward with you and how you run your business today?
I think that this is a dual answer, and I don't mean to kind of allude to dual use tech because that's what we build. But it's a dual answer in the sense that I learned a lot about technology and I learned a lot about operations, especially in really complex ecosystems when we are talking about dealing with things that affect people's lives and there is no room for marginal error. So coming at it from a technology piece first, I got to have the opportunity to learn about things like LiDAR technology. I got to learn about all of the different, like spectroscopic scanning and how you take measurements on planetary bodies and how you can infer that data with artificial intelligence and create data sets that will help map out what future missions look like in space. So there was a huge technology aspect to this and just an overall general sense of looking at the different ways that institutions develop technology. So learning the nuances between business versus academia versus government. Everybody comes at this from a very varied approach, a very wide approach. So it was very curious for me to have the opportunity to dive into that head first and get some good tech takeaways that I could then go back and implement into Space Copy. And we credit a lot of our ability to scale and grow to that knowledge base and just knowing how that ecosystem works from that peripheral. But in parallel, there's a huge portion of this that falls under operations and just people skills. I talk a lot about whether I'm doing mentorship or whether I'm sitting down conversations like this. Network is your net worth, and being able to build connections and build relationships and grow has been such a huge part about what I learned at NASA, and I was able to carry those skills onto the rest of my career. So If I was to characterize it, it would be those two things. And then making sure that you don't slack on those efforts either, that you're looking for continuous ways to grow your productivity and to grow your knowledge.
Absolutely. I love that. And one of the things that I noticed in what you were just saying there is how you took all of that, space and science and NASA seems like almost like AI did 10 years ago or 15 years ago, right? So like it's great conceptually, but a lot of people can't see it, touch it, and feel it.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to take that and apply it in some of these more rough areas, I'd love to hear how you all have kind of taken some of those concepts and really changed how you look at it, even if though the process has stayed the same.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at aerospace in general. They think, oh, it's this big, daunting industry. Maybe they don't even fully believe in what we're doing as being important. But the way that I frame the work that we do at Space Copy is we do austere logistics-based manufacturing for so many different environments. It's inherent in the name Space Copy that we're going to be putting, 3D printers on the moon and on the International Space Station, all of these ecosystems, sure. But we also operate in mining, we operate in energy and oil and gas, we operate in defense ecosystems, natural disaster sites, places that have been affected by, say, floods and wildfires, being able to rebuild infrastructure with the local materials that you have on site. So there's a bit of nuance from the construction side of where we can work and how we can operate. But for me, when you're looking at something like aerospace and you're trying to compare it in a broader sense to how businesses operate in general and how partnerships are built, it's such a fantastic example because in a lot of ways it's a niche, but it has expanded itself to become part of a bigger footprint and a bigger framework than what one person might originally imagine. So you can see that at least nowadays, automotives and defense and construction all have kind of tied their way back into aerospace. And a lot of the fundamental manufacturing technologies that we rely on as a modern species was formulated from aerospace and aviation and some of the different subvariants that came from working in those industries and figuring out what the challenges were. So, from a tech perspective, there's a huge, huge range of things that came out of this. And it's really about just kind of positioning that, breaking it down in simple form, illustrating, using your storytelling skills to say, hey, this is what we're doing now, and it's big and it's bold and it's grand, but it has a really practical application to your everyday life, just here, regular person in a regular city doing a job, and we can figure out ways to make that life easier. And I'm not just speaking about Space Copy, I'm speaking about the general industry. At least that's the kind of insight that I've had the opportunity to learn when working in this headfirst.
I think that's great. It sounds like you're taking what you know and applying it across the board, whether it's, technology and space or running the business day to day. I would love to learn a little bit about what are some of the systems or tools that you all had to put in place up front before you developed your first product.
Oof, and we're still developing out some of the components of the first product too. So this is a really, really complex question. There's, of course, the actual tech integrations of trying to build a 3D printer that's fully autonomous that can build infrastructure. So there's all of the different AI and machine learning frameworks that go into a larger software architecture. And then there's calibrating the actual 3D printing hardware and making certain process parameter adjustments and things like this to make sure that all the moving parts operate in unison, right? But from the business side, there are so many different types, everything from your ERP systems to your communication platforms, to just being able to keep track of things on a spreadsheet and make sure that things are getting done as they should be. And it's something that needs continuous optimization on our part. It's not something that we say, hey, we've already figured it out already, but we do have our frameworks. As far as just regular day-to-day life goes, you've got your spreadsheet tools, you've got your Microsoft Office and your Google Drive up and running and getting everything done. We've got our Slack communications up and running, and our ERP systems and our media management tools, and trying to spread the word of what we're doing in a cohesive manner throughout social media platforms and going to trade shows and conferences, and just having an overall system in how we communicate our message to people. And then from the tech perspective, you go back into the laboratory and you're looking at what you're trying to build, and You look at that extruder and you say, I don't know if that's the right material for this extruder, or I think we need a mesh that's going to go onto this mechanism. Where's the best place that we can gather that resource from? So when I look at what do we need for the first product, it is a conjunction between the actual day-to-day, what it takes to run a business from a general sense, all the different softwares and the people. And then there's also the tech side of it is just what are the different vendors that we need to partner with, the researchers, the academic institutions, the government agencies, and then trying to tie that all together into one lab room and actually get hardware that functions.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing there, if I boil it all down, is at the end of the day, whatever's going on, you have to pivot and make it work. Whether you need a different product, whether you're finding something, a different tool from an operational perspective, or for what you're developing from a technology perspective, you're constantly pivoting and trying to go in a different direction. And I know, as we talked before, one of the things that came up was that this is not the first time, right? So you guys have pivoted from just doing aerospace to now doing these more tough environments. So can you talk me through a little bit of the thought process around how you handle that constant change and pivoting and going in the next direction?
For sure. And pivot was the buzzword of the company in 2024. We adopted the word secret sauce as the buzzword of the year for 2025. And that kind of preliminary data, it changes and ebbs and flows significantly. And I credit pivoting to that significantly. So I was sitting in a conference hall circa June 2024. We were in a room with some of the folks that we went through a Techstars accelerator with. We were in the room with some NASA folks and some general industry folks and some defense folks as well. And I was sitting down and having a one-to-one with a mentor that was saying to me, what you're building is great and you're going to be successful in no matter what you do. You have the skill for it, but you need to really consider pivoting here because you're focused on such a niche that your market hasn't caught up with, that you'll be successful, but that revenue is not going to generate for another 5 or 10 years. And what are you going to do in the meantime? And that was a fundamental lesson that brought back what I learned in business school, which is being able to adapt to get the job done in order to stay afloat. And that is a tool that's used in negotiation. It's a tool that's used in entrepreneurship, and it's a tool that's used in day-to-day life. So for me, it took some adjustment into understanding what does pivoting mean? What does storytelling mean? How can we convey what we want to do in a way that ties into the problems that people currently have? What we had to do from the offset, and something that we still continue to do to this present day, is I kind of like to characterize it as customer discovery, where we're actually sitting down with potential end users and listening more than sales pitching, figuring out, just stepping into the room and saying, how's your day going? Learn from them. What are your problems? What's bothering you? Before you stepped into this call with us, what was the thing that was on the top folder on your desk that was the biggest concern? And after, 10, 15, 20 minutes of that, we just suddenly realize that we can solve 5 or 10 of those different problems for you. So it's kind of flipping the bottleneck over and looking at it from a wider scope and saying, tell us what's bothering you, tell us what's on your mind, and then being able to pivot based on a more educated decision from what you inferred from that other party. So we still have the original dream and vision, putting 3D printers on the moon. We have the NASA contracts to back it up, and so many different private partnerships as well. But then it comes into present day of being able to survive in the next 2 to 5 years, wherein we need to get into natural disaster sites. For example, we're sending something up to the Arctic next year for field testing. We had to really listen to those consumer audiences and say, hey, we have door hinges on our houses in the Arctic that keep breaking and we have no way of replacing them. Okay, we can 3D print door hinges. So it's just about simplifying it down.
That is fascinating. So I love what you're talking about, from going in to that room to actually making that true pivot, right? Because one of the things that I see from a finance perspective on a regular basis is, particularly from an investor lens, everyone wants a clear path to revenue. Everyone wants to know, okay, what's your revenue projection look like? What's your MRR? How do you survive as a company who is in process or in an industry where it's going to take a little bit longer. Fabulous idea. You have prototypes, all of these things going, but it takes a while, as you mentioned, for the industry to catch up and for the need to be identified.
100%. And I look back to when we started. We incorporated the day before Silicon Valley Bank crashed. We had no idea what was coming to us. And yeah, it was a rough time. Fundraising now is not like it was in venture capital circa 2021. We have to validate and prove so much of what we're trying to achieve before we can get to a point in which the consumer audience and the investor audience really has faith and confidence in what we're doing. And I don't blame them for that aversion. We're living in
Right.
like a really just generally complicated economic time. But I kind of look at this in present day mode and I think to myself, what do we actually have to do? What are our early achievable goals? And what that looks like from my perspective is get out there and try and validate and get the MVP for what you're trying to build and get a pilot project in place. Whether it's funded, whether it's not funded, just get out into an ecosystem where you know that it's going to generate revenue if you can prove that it works. And not to say that you should go out there and just like show off your feathers and try and prove and validate yourself, but you have to. That is the price of entrepreneurship today compared to 5 or even 10 years ago, where you could have an awesome idea and you would get venture capital for it. Now, what we're doing in our approach at Space Copy is a lot of government contracting. So trying to win grants that will get us to a pilot project, get the rest of the prototype built out, and then really conveying as a pre-revenue startup that's been around the block in the last few years, trying to figure out the ebbs and flows. What do we need to do to optimize? And we learned a lot, and we're still continuing to learn about time management and prioritization and the P-win value, which is the percentage of winning. And that counts in everything from government contracting to talking to clients to talking to investors. What's the percentage that you're going to win in this conversation? Are you talking to the right person? It's all about finding your people. It doesn't mean that you have a bad technology or that you have a bad roadmap. You just have to make sure that you're being succinct and clear in that pathway to that ROI, and then making sure that you're getting in front of somebody that is intelligent enough to be able to support you to the point in which that you can validate everything that you've already been talking about.
That is so smart, and I think what you're saying there about validating, a lot of people who come in and are just starting out as an entrepreneur, a lot of these things don't happen quickly. As you're talking about government contracting, that is a long process.
Yeah.
On a good day, that's a long process, right? So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that. And I'd also love to hear, what are some of the things that you have learned that have changed your path as an entrepreneur just from listening to your clients? I think that is such a crucial step, not just in the sales process, but also in delivery, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't want to sell a product that people don't really want or don't really need. So I'd love to hear your take on that as well.
Yeah, what is it they say? Patience is a virtue. We have to hold on to that mindset a little bit, because I'll start with the topic on government contracting. It takes months and sometimes years to break through that glass ceiling. And you just need one good, what we call SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grant. We need one good SBIR to break through the barrier, and then you unlock the whole treasure trove of government contracting. And I'm just speaking in US terms. We operate in Canada, we operate in Europe, so we have a wide lens that we can apply ourselves towards. We've done work in the Middle East, so we are thinking of this from an international scale as well, but even just boiling it down to the primary market, which is the United States. Government contracting is not easy. Current political situations do not make it easier. And you have to be prepared to kind of batten down your hatches and just, output as much as you possibly can. We write a grant template, and we submit, 6, 8 of them per month. And it takes 3 to 6 months to hear back. And a lot of times you have like a 6% win rate. So you have to be really, really resilient, and you have to keep applying and you have to keep trying. And it's not a one-stop shop. It's not one government agency. There's, for the industry that we work in, there's NASA, there's the Department of Defense and all of its different subsidiaries, from the Army to the Navy to the Air Force. There are things like NSF, the National Science Foundation, and there's so many different subvariants of where you can do government contracting from. So there's a wide pool, but you have to be resilient enough to continue casting that net. Translating that thought process now back into being resilient when you're talking to clients, it's not easy either. That kind of, I think, ties back into my point about being able to pivot. Is the things I've learned just from listening are worth their weight in gold. If you can come out of a conversation, not with a purchase order necessarily, rarely does that ever happen on a first call, but just come out of that discovery call and just say, hey, okay, I understand more about this person. What's their problem? They need to work in, for example, a mining site. They have people that are going down into this mine to try and extract a resource. It's highly austere. There's brittle rock formations that are causing a whole slew of disasters, not just on the human capital, but also on the actual infrastructure that's in those mining sites. Say a disaster happens, right? What happens not just to the people in those mining sites, but the equipment and the infrastructure that was paid for to be delivered into those ecosystems. You're sitting there, you're listening to this story from the customer, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, that's their problem. What if we started 3D printing trusses to provide support structures around the entrance of these mining sites so that if there was some fragmented and broken rock, then they would be able to get things out and get people out safely before full disaster struck. So this is just one of dozens and maybe even hundreds of examples that we learned that there are different use cases that tie back into our broader mission just by listening to those clients. And it goes for every client, from government to industry to just sitting down and talking to somebody.
Absolutely. I think, as my grandmother would say, we have two ears and one mouth for a reason. So I love that you're listening to your clients, and it sounds like it's providing extreme value both to you and to them, because you're learning more and more how to show up for them and where you can lean in and help. I'd love to know your thoughts on which industries here on Earth would be best suited for some of this rugged 3D printing. I know you've mentioned manufacturing and mining. Where do you see the next wave of this technology going to?
I'm definitely poking around in mining and energy, oil and gas pipelines, and we're focused on sustainability and clean energy as best as we possibly can. Like our printers are based on solar power as much as possible. But realistically speaking, it's not like oil and gas is going to disappear. We rely on it so fundamentally as an economy. But there are repairs to be made in the longevity of overall pipelines. You have a crack, in comes disaster, you have leakages, you have sometimes meters upon meters of infrastructure that needs to be replaced. We could be providing those replacement pieces, especially rapidly. Things break down at 3:00 in the morning in the middle of the desert or the middle of the Arctic or in a tropics environment or just any contested logistic zone. And this is not isolated to one industry either. I say mining, I say oil and gas, but defense, construction, rural communities as well. So it can be applied for civilian use and just everyday folks that are working and living and operating in really remote communities. Something breaks down in the middle of the night. It's a vehicle. It's a house that, is no longer structurally safe. It's a pipeline. Being able to have access to a technology that can provide an instantaneous repair part, the exact size, the exact geometry, the exact piece that you need, is worth more than I think people realize. Because as far as you're talking about, working in space, current payload costs are anywhere from $400,000 to $1.2 million for every kilogram of supplies that you send up. The same, maybe not quite as extreme, but the same could be said about working in extreme environments on Earth. It's high cost, it's high risk. You have lives on the line. Even worse yet, if it's what we call legacy equipment, so something that's no longer being produced by the original manufacturer and a part breaks down and you're still using that truck every single day to deliver food to a rural community, you can't afford to be waiting for days, weeks, or months at a time to be able to repair infrastructure. So when I see use case and I talk about mining or general manufacturing, construction, defense, I think of this from the perspective that regardless of what ecosystem we're working in, the mission is the same, which is we have a catalog of over 250 items up to a meter in size that can be 3D printed. We can go into that extreme climate. Doesn't matter if it's hot, doesn't matter if it's cold, doesn't matter if there's earthquakes. We have stable systems that are able to 3D print using scrap metal or soil or sand or whatever's around you, and be able to provide that repair part instantly so that you're cutting out that supply chain altogether of needing to deliver supplies. And at the very least, you're providing a very durable and very firm standing fix to a really urgent problem.
That's incredible. I think a lot about when COVID first happened. One of the very first things that we noticed was the supply chain disruption,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Same for community I'm from in Upper East Tennessee, just experienced extreme flooding,
Yeah.
and getting some of those crucial parts was huge for them. Whether, I had friends who had to fly things in or new people in that community. I can't imagine what it would be like to print a car part and say, okay, now my truck's running and I can deliver groceries or formula or medicine or whatever that is.
Exactly.
So I think that's truly incredible and huge for not just the tech space, but people in general, because it's a big part of our ecosystem and how this stuff plays in together.
Absolutely. That's why we do what we do.
I love it. So, one other question that I have for you, as an entrepreneur and a business owner, talk to me a little bit about how you all have raised capital and what you would suggest for other entrepreneurs who are in the early stage and are looking to grow and do such big things that you all are accomplishing today.
Current and in progress, so I can speak in live time. Our fundraising journey is not easy. When somebody hears out loud that, we're working in extreme environments to provide infrastructure, and it sounds logical, right? But the goal is to put 3D printers on the moon. That's what we're doing here. And you're an investor and you hear that out loud, and you have to pause and you have to listen to that a second or a third time to wrap your mind around it. And then you have to listen to figure out if this is even possible, and you have to do the math behind it. And the same could be said about working in extreme environments. If you're familiar with 3D printing or any kind of manufacturing in a general sense, you know that working with different materials in one system is nearly impossible to do. So when you think about this from the tech perspective and you start to dive into it, you can get quite bashful when it comes to the overall upfront cost structure of buying equipment and installing it and testing it and getting pilot projects. It is CapEx intensive from the early offset. But being able to frame that in a way that talks about where that profitability and that revenue generation starts to come in, not only is it real, it's extreme. Total addressable markets are huge for contested logistics environments, for working in any of the ecosystems that I described in our conversation today. And it's really about being able to sit down and break it down simply. When I look at what we've done to date, we've raised capital through friends and family. I did some bootstrapping. We did some accelerators and incubator programs that had some financial rewards at the end. We did some government contracting and still continue to do so. And we've taken home a few minor grants, and we've moved on to venture capital investing as well. And I do say that venture capital is the bridge of testament. You have to cross that bridge in order to really come to the other side and understand how you can be a successful entrepreneur, is because you don't really know the challenges of being able to raise capital until you've tried to raise from a venture capitalist. The government contracting side, I think, is pretty linear. It's pretty black and white. You are meeting a requirement and you write a good enough proposal to explain why you satisfy that requirement and who's going to benefit from an economic perspective. Investor conversations are much more emotional based. There is rationale and logic to it, of course, and there are certain benchmarks and KPIs that you have to meet in that discussion when you talk about things like post-money valuation and what's your burn rate and what's your MRRs, those kind of certain things that you brought up earlier in the talk today. You have to be able to have answers to those questions, but you have to be able to answer why you, why now, why your team, why your technology. When we went through Techstars, we were told that there are 6 things that a venture capitalist has to have confidence in before they invest. And that is team, 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 technology, market, and team, because team comes back. They need to know that you're the right person, that you have the skill, the resilience, and the grit to come back to this multiple times over and do exactly what we talked about, is pivoting and customer discovery and getting out to end users and actually proving that you can do this great, bold thing that you're trying to achieve. And this is not strictly an AI and SaaS based company. So we don't have, I'd say, like the lower burn rate that a lot of other tech companies might have in this day and age. We are heavily robotics and manufacturing focused. There's a lot of equipment that comes into play. And I think that that is equal parts also attributed to understanding your investor persona. We talked with probably hundreds of different investors to date and just tried to get their opinion on their thesis. It took us a while to figure out what the right questions to ask were, and I'll kind of just turn this into a longer thread on if you're an entrepreneur that's trying to raise capital for the first time, especially from an angel, family office, or a venture capitalist. Make sure that you're in the room with somebody that is able to understand what you're building, and you'll be able to figure that out within the first 5 to 10 minutes, typically, if they're following along or if they're checking their cell phone. Once you kind of get through that, or even before, and I say this even better, even before you get into talking about your tech, don't do a sales pitch. Don't tell them why you're the best person for the job. You leave that for after, we'll get to that. But spend some actual quality time, just like in customer discovery. Ask, how's your day going? Ask that investor, what's your thesis? What are some companies that you've invested in? If you didn't do your research beforehand, do that, of course, but actually sit down and talk to that investor and say, okay, you invested in XYZ company. What was it about them that spoke to you? What are you looking for when you compare the lifetime of your fund to the companies that you invest in? And just asking those questions as a positioning, even before you get into talking about what you're building, will be able to help you shape and mold your pitch so that you're delivering something that is attuned to what they're asking for. And the exact same thing goes for customer discovery. It's just about putting it through a slightly different lens and thinking of this strictly from the kind of ROI investment thesis perspective.
That's some great advice, and I think the more I talk to entrepreneurs who have gone the VC route, the more I keep hearing a very consistent theme. It's all about you as the founder. It's, do they trust you? Do they like you? Do they think that you're going to follow through with what you said, even when it really sucks? Because some days being an entrepreneur can be very lonely and it can be a tough journey. So they're looking for people like you were talking about who have some of that staying power. So I love what you're talking about there. This has been a great conversation. Before we wrap up, I have just one more question for you. I'd love to hear, what's one secret that you wish you would have known as you started out as an entrepreneur?
Ooh, how long do we really have to dive into that? One thing. It's always difficult to pinpoint just one thing because I feel that I have learned more in entrepreneurship than I did in my entire tenure at business school and my entire tenure at NASA. One thing that I wish I would have known from the beginning is that you have to be able to understand other people's perspective and storytell around it and connect with people around what's kind of in their mind. It comes back heavily to the talk that we had about pivoting, and also the talk that we just had about investor persona and customer discovery and being able to sit down and ask somebody, how's your day going, and figure out what they actually want and need. That for me, and it's still something that I need to polish regularly as a founder, and it's something that I try to instill in the rest of our team, is coming to a conversation with an intelligent perspective on what this person actually wants. But then before you actually assume what that is, ask them. Being able to communicate in a way that helps you understand more than you think you did going into that conversation allows you to unlock true potential synergy. And it can not just lead to you closing a deal, but if you don't find that alignment, maybe there's somebody within their network that is aligned. And by sitting down and listening to their challenges and their pain points, and then coming into the conversation, talking about what you're building, you get a more nuanced discussion. It's not just a series of yes and no questions. Do you need this? Do you want this? It's actually having a proper discussion, building a relationship. Because at the end of the day, people aren't going to remember you necessarily by how cool your tech was and what all of your specifications are, and this awesome thing that you're building. Hopefully they remember a little bit, but they're going to remember how they felt in that conversation. And if they felt positive, then they're going to look for ways to try and spread that positivity to other people within their network. And it's going to be a ripple effect. And this is something that I continue to evolve on as an entrepreneur. And if I had known that from day one, there's probably a good dozen or two conversations that I would have structured differently. And I can look back on that with pride and say that that's something that I've learned and I continue to grow from.
That's wonderful. And I think continuing to evolve and learn as an entrepreneur is great. And going back to that constant listening and trying to figure out how you can help somebody else, because I truly believe that, whether you're in tech, whether you're in aerospace, whatever it is, it's a very small world, especially when you get into like the VC area and working with these investors. They all know each other.
They do.
And to your point, it may not be the right time for them right now or the right tech for them, but they probably know two or three other people who might be very interested in what you're doing. So I love your perspective on that.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, it's really incredible to be part of this industry.
It absolutely is. Well, today has been a wonderful conversation. Before we wrap up, if our listeners want to connect with you and learn a little bit more about what you're working on, what's the best way for them to reach out and connect with you?
Well, you can definitely connect with me directly on LinkedIn, Madison C. Feehan. But you can check out our website, Space Copy. We have quarterly newsletters that you can subscribe to learn more about, the wonders of 3D printing in extreme environments, including in space. We have regular opportunities for internships, for example, for students and early career professionals across a variety of different disciplines. And those are things that you follow along Space Copy on LinkedIn or Space Copy Inc. on Instagram, or you subscribe to the website. You get to learn about these things first. And then I do a lot of conferences and trade shows and travel. So definitely make sure that, listeners, if you're interested in cool tech like this, you subscribe, you get in the know, and hopefully we can have the opportunity to meet and dive into even more dynamic discussions in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everybody for listening to C-Suite Secrets. If you have found today's conversation as valuable as I have, be sure to hit that like and follow button and share with somebody else who is building their business. And if you want more tips to grow your business between episodes, join us on Facebook at C-Suite Insiders. And until next time, keep growing. And remember, you don't have to do this alone.